Last night, David Zaritsky posted a wonderful video explaining how he felt about the fact that the estate of Ian Fleming had authorized certain changes to be made to the James Bond books prior to their re-release under Ian Fleming Publications in April. And he spoke beautifully. And one of the things that was really powerful, I think, was at the end where he was asking Ian Fleming Publications to help us help them. And that inspired me to make a message or send a message. I don't know. I wish I had the opportunity to talk to Ian Fleming Publications and say this to them. That's what David said is exactly how we feel. We are Bond fans. We love and appreciate and revere the writing of Ian Fleming. And you are the family of Ian Fleming, and you are the guardians of his legacy. And I know that you have the best intentions in everything that you do. That safeguarding his legacy means more to you than making money or selling out. So I can really understand and appreciate that. And the Bond community is 100% with you in that. We are invested in Ian Fleming Publications being successful. And I'll confess, I'm a little more invested than a lot of other people because I'm a successful self-published author, and I see every day traditional publishing failing the authors that it represents. And I think it's incredibly exciting that Ian Fleming Publications is publishing the books of Ian Fleming. It's like this incredible cultural shift, moving away from traditional publishing. And I personally really want Ian Fleming Publications to be massively successful because I want to stick it to traditional publishers, really. I want to see publishing give authors a chance to be guardians of their own legacy. And that's exactly what you're doing. You've become Ian Fleming Publications to protect the legacy of Ian Fleming. And one of the best ways that you can protect the legacy of Ian Fleming is keeping him alive. And you do that through his writing. And that's why it's so important that you don't change his writing. And let me explain what I mean by that. And please bear with me because this might sound a bit hokey. But when I say keep him alive through his writing, that's actually what I mean. That's the incredible thing about writing. When an author writes something, they create in their head a world with characters, real, vivid, living characters. And they are in places where you can breathe in deeply and smell things and taste things and hear things. And Ian Fleming, as a writer, one of the things that defines him is the fact that with just a few short words, he could create such visceral scenes in your head that it was like you were there. And that's really what reading is. Like, I pick up a copy of Diamonds Are Forever and I start reading and I enter the flow state. And it's like I'm meditating, but instead of meditating by like focusing on my breathing or anything like that, I'm meditating by creating in my head like an entire world as described by Ian Fleming. I get to meditate in the mind of Ian Fleming, and not just Ian Fleming. I get to meditate in the mind of Ian Fleming when he wrote a particular book. So Live and Let Die. I get to meditate in the mind of Ian Fleming as he was in 1954. It's like I start reading Live and Let Die, and the whole world dissolves around me, and suddenly I'm sitting in his room in Goldeneye, across from Ian Fleming, exactly as he was in 1954. And he tells me this story. And yeah, sometimes he will use words that were used in those times, like you would describe a black person as a Negro. In the 1950s, that wasn't offensive. In fact, that's how black people describe themselves. And today we look back and it's offensive, but with what we've done is replace it with the word black. Yes, but if you had a time machine and you could go back in time to 1954 and have the opportunity to sit down and listen to Ian Fleming read a story to you, would you stop him at every moment and be like, oh, no, Ian, I'm sorry, you can't use that word, it's extremely offensive. No, you wouldn't do that. You just want to be there, and you'd want the authentic experience, and that's what the books give you. It's like having a time machine and going back in time and meditating in this world that Ian Fleming has created. And it means more, part of it is you get to experience, when you read a story, you experience it in real time in your head. And for that period of time, you're walking side by side with Ian Fleming. He's telling you a story. It is this incredibly intimate thing. That's the thing about writing. I write a book and somebody reads it, and they have an insight into who I am and my mind and my motivations that people who just know me on the day-to-day don't. It's incredible. But more than that, reading's like a shared experience. So, when I say I'm reading Live and Let Die, and it's like I'm sitting in a room in Goldeneye, listening to Ian Fleming speak to me and tell me this story, David Zaritsky is sitting beside me because he had that same experience. And Matt Spare from Bond Suits is also having that experience. And Alex Lamas is having that experience. We've all sat in the same room. We've all sat in the same seat. We've all had this shared experience. It's amazing. And it means when you meet a fellow Bond fan, you click so instantly with them because you've had this shared experience, even though you've never met before. It's like, I know David Zaritsky, and I've met him face to face at the wonderful The Other Fellow premiere that we had in New York, and Gather All, and the original Gather All back in 2019. And those are real life experiences I've had with David. But also, David was with me when Tracy got shot. David was with me when Felix got eaten by a shark. David sat down and had dinner with me and Mr. DuPont and Bond at the Fontainebleau in Miami. It's when you read a book, you get to meditate in the mind of Ian Fleming, and other people get to meditate in the mind of Ian Fleming, and we all end up sharing this incredible experience through the books. And part of what makes that so magical is that you are really listening and reading to the words of Ian Fleming as Ian Fleming was then. In Live and Let Die, you meet Ian Fleming as he was and as he thought and as he breathed in 1954. When you read Dr. No, you get to meet Ian in 1958, and he's a different person. And he thinks differently, and he talks differently, and he's got different motivations. And both books are set in Jamaica, and yet you get to see 4 years of how Jamaica has changed as well. In Dr. No, there's a passing reference to a Negro doctor, and I think in this day and age, the Ian Fleming publications looked at that and thought that the word Negro was offensive, so they removed it. So it just says doctor now. But what you have to understand is in 1958, it was a big deal to have a black doctor. My father grew up in Jamaica in the 1940s. He was there in 1942, the same time Ian Fleming was. And he had his tonsils out, and the surgeon was black. And to this day, when he tells this story, he's always like, yes, my surgeon was black. And he doesn't say it in a racist way. He always talks about what a fun experience it was. And he had his tonsils out, and then he got to eat ice cream and stuff like that. But to him, it was really surprising and eye-opening, and wow, the surgeon was black, because in parochial England you didn't have black doctors or surgeons, and so it was a big deal. And when you suck out that one word, you suck out something that at the time in 1958 to readers was a big deal. And we now, I can read Dr. No, and I can talk to someone else who's read Dr. No, and I can tell them this anecdote about my father having his tonsils out in Jamaica in the 1940s, and they can be like, oh wow, I never knew that before, and they can look it in their brain and get some more cultural context. This is what we do as Bond fans. There are Bond fans from every single demographic. There are all sorts of homophobic elements in the James Bond books, and yet James Bond has a huge queer following. And I can talk to someone like David Lobrecht-Ellis, licensed to queer, about James Bond, and we can discuss things that we both observed. Like, we both got to see Honeychild Rider naked on a beach, and we both got to observe the fact that her bottom was shaped like that of a boy. And, we can talk about that because it's a shared experience we have. And, when you take out elements and you rewrite elements, and you're literally rewriting elements, like where it's in Harlem when Bond's at a nightclub and it's saying people are grunting like pigs at a trough, and you rewrite that to the what is it, the tension in the air was electric. It's like, that's not what Ian Fleming said. It's like I'm sitting in a room with Ian Fleming, entranced, listening to him tell me the story. I'm experiencing the story as if I was there in Harlem in the 1950s. And then just as you get to the good bit, you walk in and you say, "Stop, Ian, stop. No, we're not going to say that. Pigs at the trough, that might have negative connotations. So do you mind just saying that the tension in the room is electric? Yeah, I think that's better, isn't it? Yes, okay, thank you, Ian. Right, carry on. We'll see you later." And then walk out again. Yeah, you'd like come in and interrupted the experience. And I don't think you appreciate that. I just read recently Catcher in the Rye, which I think was that in the 1950s or the 1960s, and that had all sorts of negative things that would be deemed negative. Typical video cut out just as I was getting to the good bit. I just mentioned that I read Catcher in the Rye last summer because it's such an important book in like the American culture, and I didn't particularly enjoy it, but my son, my 14-year-old, did enjoy it, and that has terms like Negro in it, and definitely some sections of it that are homophobic. I mean, but again, it's interesting because the main character says lots of homophobic things, but then you realise that he's had some experience or exposure to homosexuality at a time when it was like so forbidden. And all of these things, the publishers would never think of going in. Well, I don't know. Maybe they have. I'll have to Google that. To my mind, I imagined that the publishers never went in and started changing parts of Catcher in the Rye to make it more palatable for 21st century audiences, because they knew that when J.D. Salinger wrote that, he wrote it to represent a period in time because it's literature. And I think what Ian Fleming Publications has lost is the fact that Ian Fleming is literature. I know he described his books as literature with a small L, but 70 years later, they have been entered into the canon of English literature or English language literature. They are like sacred texts almost. I mean, to me, to edit the words of Ian Fleming is like editing the words of Shakespeare. And there are elements in Shakespeare, like the treatment of Shylock in Merchant of Venice, that is very, very anti-Semitic. And so, this day and age, you look back, do you rewrite the Merchant of Venice? No, you don't. Of course not, because it's a historical document. And I think Ian Fleming Publications has lost sight of the fact that what is going to preserve the life and legacy of Ian Fleming is to keep the words he wrote as they were then. And that means that anybody from now until the end of time has the opportunity to open up a book and slip into the flow state and have this world that Ian Fleming created materialize around them and listen to him speak as he spoke right then at that point in time. The unaltered works of Ian Fleming are like a time machine that allow us to go back and speak to Ian Fleming. He lives on, preserved within the pages of each and every James Bond book. Each and every James Bond book preserves just a snapshot of who Ian was at that particular point in time and what the world was like at that particular point in time. It's like, yeah, in Thunderball, Largo's manservants were Negroes, because Negro was not an offensive term at that time. And yeah, you had all these rich white people who had black people as servants. That was something that is worth remembering from a cultural perspective. Just as in Dr. No, it's worth observing from a cultural perspective the fact that the immigration officer was a Negro. Remember, the word wasn't offensive then. And you can change it now, but back then, if you have a time machine, you go back to a time when it wasn't offensive. So it's you shouldn't change it, because you change the past if you do that. But as I said, you can't just take out the race of the immigration officer or the doctor, because that was significant. When you read it, it's like, oh, in England, they didn't have very many black people at that particular point in time. We had the Windrush generation coming in. So that was going to change within the span, like from Live and Let Die to Dr. No, 4 years. Like the demographics in London had been altered massively because of what they call the Windrush generation, which are all the people, the black people from the West Indies coming to the UK. The UK now is this incredible, diverse melting pot, and there is this such an amazing West Indian culture that has become ingrained with British culture, just like the national dish of England is curry. It's, you know, part of what makes modern British culture is West Indian influence, and West Indians, people from West Indian backgrounds who are as British as they come. That's it. And by preserving Ian Fleming's words, you get to preserve these elements. In Live and Let Die, I don't think they refer to like black doctors and black things, and Dr. No, they do. Maybe that represents, you know, a change in the opportunities that were being offered to people at that time in Jamaica. These are all tiny little snapshots, historical touches that just please don't mess with them. As I said, the books, Ian Fleming's books, preserve him in a state that gives us all the opportunity to go and visit him. And by changing what he says, you rob that experience from us. And you might think, oh, these are only tiny changes, they don't really matter. But, you know, they do. They absolutely do. And it's not, I know you are the family of Ian Fleming, and you get, you know, legally you can do what you want. But we are Bond fans. And we are the ones who keep Ian Fleming's legacy alive as much as you do, by having book clubs like the Bond Experience has, by buying the books, reading the books, going to Goodwill and searching around and buying different versions of the same book so you have the different covers. We keep him alive through these books, and that means you have a responsibility not to mess with that, okay? That it is a betrayal to all of the people who keep Ian's legacy alive to this day. It is a betrayal to alter his words. You're betraying his legacy. You're not protecting it. And his legacy is not always positive. But if you look at how diverse the Bond community is, like what a large proportion of Bond fans who. The number of Bond fans, for example, who are queer, shows that they are willing to forgive or overlook the homophobic things in the James Bond books, because there are other elements in there that resonate with them, other elements of like queerness, that there are subtext in there that appeal to them. And that means, you know, it's not just a few stuck-up middle-aged white men who are complaining about this. It's everyone from every background. We love Ian and we appreciate Ian, and we are willing to forgive him the things that we find distasteful now, because we have a time machine with these books. We get to go and sit with him, and when you go and sit with somebody and they say something homophobic, you can be like, oh, silly old Ian. Anyway, because there are so many things that he says that are positive and uplift you. So he's a real person. You get to preserve him as a real person by not messing with the words that he wrote. I've rabbited on enough, but as you can see, this is something I'm very, very passionate about. But that's because, you know, I'm a writer, and I'm sure I've written things that people might find distasteful, but I would not want anybody going in and messing around with them. And yeah, you can say, oh, well, they edited Live and Let Die for the American market and Ian signed off on it. And it's like, yes, he signed off on that. Would he sign off on this? It's very presumptuous of you to assume he would. I mean, you can say that, oh, we're the family of Ian Fleming, so, you know, you have that right. But as Bond fans, we feel a certain sense of ownership of the legacy that Ian left because we continue to uphold it. And so to us, it is very presumptuous to feel that you should just go in and change something. As I said, it robs us of a shared cultural experience. In 10 years' time, if I meet somebody who's only read the edited James Bond books, we can talk about James Bond, and yeah, we can absolutely talk about the shared experiences we have reading the books, but his shared experience is going to be slightly different to mine. He's not going to have the context that I did. There are going to be elements that, you know, if I talk about, oh yeah, the books, you know, there were certain parts of it that were kind of racist, and we're like, really? And he won't actually be able to discuss that with me in the same way because the version he read is going to be different to the version I read. And so you're robbing us of a way to connect with other Bond fans. I don't know. That's just how I feel about it, and I really, really want you to consider that, because we're not giving you a hard time about this because we're a bunch of like right-wing loonies. If anything, we're a bunch of obsessive nerds, and we consider Ian Fleming's books to be sacred texts, and yeah, that's why we're up in arms about it. And you have the opportunity to do this, and we can't really stop you at the end of the day, but there are going to be consequences. I mean, people are literally going to boycott buying your books because you change the words of Ian Fleming. And the opposite is, if you leave the words as they are, Bond fans are going to buy the books because they've got new covers and they're exciting. And I'm going to buy the books because I want to support Ian Fleming Publications, because I really want Ian Fleming Publications to be successful. And I know that they can. And you're just putting us in the impossible situation because, yeah, you've betrayed us by changing the words that Ian Fleming wrote. And you've robbed us of a common connection that many of us have. And we're not just going to roll over and accept that. We're going to hold you accountable. That's the most important thing. We're just holding you accountable. We will support Ian Fleming Publications to the max, but you have to treat us with a certain amount of respect as well as the fans and supporters and the people who want to safeguard Ian Fleming's legacy just as much as you do. Anyway, thank you very much, and I'll be back with another video soon. Bye. I'm Roland Hume. I've sold 67,000 copies of my books. If you want to find out how I did it, I've got a link right here you can click, and otherwise don't forget to subscribe. I've got more videos coming soon. Thank you.